Joining us in studio this morning, Prosecuting Attorney Grant Loebs from here in Twin Falls County. And Steve Millington mentioned in the last hour of the program that the best conversations happen off air. Uh, we won't have to go into that, but it's true to some extent that we often have better talks off air than we do on air. So we do need to point out it's good to see you again. The last
Good to
time we
see you.
talked, Election Day was, gosh, close to a month away still at that point. 3 weeks anyway.
I think so.
We have a lot to chat about today, and of course, for folks who'd like to actually have a question or comment for the prosecuting attorney, you can reach us by dialing 736-0300, 736-0300. Of course, if you have a call from out of state, I don't mention this too much, but obviously you have to dial the prefix 208. I sent you a short list of ideas that I had for the show. Um, and one of them, of course, was we had a crime over the weekend. It's called murder suicide. I guess you technically it'd be homicide suicide at the moment. It's a better way to put that. And my question wasn't so much dealing with that specific case, but the question was we may not be seeing any more crime in Twin Falls County, but has the nature of the crime we're seeing has that changed?
Well, we're seeing both more crime and different crime, but the overwhelming number of cases are still drug related. Methamphetamine, heroin, um, large scale marijuana trafficking. Those are the things that have really dominated Twin Falls crime scene for the last few years with marijuana and I'm not talking possessing a joint. I'm talking pounds of marijuana and heroin being the ones that are kind of spiking right now. But overall, the state of Idaho and Twin Falls County have both had crime increases over 2014. Of course, we don't have the 2016 numbers yet. We're talking about the 2015 numbers, or are higher than 2014. So that's not surprising to those of us who work in the business, the police and the prosecutors. We all see that on a daily basis. But I, I think that you see, the public, see the violent crimes more than you see the others, and to the extent that there are um, violent crimes that capture the attention of the public, it looks like there are more of those crimes, and there is a slight increase in those, but no more of an increase in those than there are in other crimes.
I think it's analogous to something I heard a few years ago because with the rise of the internet and cable news, like on the national level, if there's a mass shooting, you see it then 48 times a day on TV, and it gives the impression that there are more mass shootings when even the facts
Hmm.
are that there are actually fewer of them, and the numbers have been dropping for decades. We have even on the local level, though, more media in the sense that you have a lot more web attention and things like that. So it may give the public an impression of that we're increasingly lawless, but I wouldn't know that that's the case.
Well, if you look at the increase in crime, there's been a about a 5% increase um, in violent crime, 5 to 6% increase in violent crime in the state from 2015 to 2014. But other types of crime, there have been a greater increase than that. But again, it just depends what you see. I mean, if you ask a policeman, whether his crime's up or down, from their point of view, it always seems to be up because they're dealing with it on a daily basis. Same with us. But
Population grows, you're going to see more
sure.
too.
Hmm.
Boise having the police shooting over the weekend, and one of the officers is going to take a long time to recover. And these are
Right.
crimes that may not have been fairly common in
Well, that
Idaho
guy shot
anywhere.
4 people.
Right, and he actually
And a
was on a
police
spree.
dog. Hmm.
Right,
He
Uh,
shot at 2 others and didn't hit them. And of course, he was just released from prison.
and that maybe gets us back to. I wrote a comment here, which was not in yesterday's questions I sent over to you or topics, but it says, will a new president keep criminals behind bars? Because we've had a situation where the White House over the last few years has decided that we should open up the gates, and some states are doing the same and allowing these guys back out on the streets. And I think you've warned multiple times here in the
Yes.
studio that this
Well,
is a cause for crime.
Yes, and we've been fighting that in our legislature for a while, and that is what is happening in Idaho too, to a lesser extent. It's not like the gates are just being opened up and people are walking out. I think what you're referring to with President Obama is all the commutations and straight out releases from prison that he's been doing. I think he's up to 700 some now, and I think we haven't seen anything yet. I think before he leaves, he's going to potentially double that number. But Idaho's system situation is a lot different. What we have been going to increasingly in the last couple of years is almost immediate parole when parole eligibility comes up. The governor doesn't release people from prison, like the president is doing. But we have a system where people serve a certain period of time under the Idaho sentencing scheme. The judges are always required to tell a person what their minimum time to serve and what their maximum time to serve is. And once the minimum time to serve is up, then they're in the parole system potentially, and then the parole board can hear their case and decide whether to release them. And what we're seeing now is more people getting released almost immediately after their minimum time is served. And that's what happened with this guy in Boise, from what I understand. He had been sentenced to a long period of incarceration with a minimum period to serve. He served the minimum. They let him out. He shoots four people.
Carjacked an 89-year-old woman,
Yep,
possibly too.
yep. He carjacked an 89-year-old woman, shot two policemen, a police dog, and two civilians. And he shot at two other civilians and didn't hit them.
When you talk a little bit about how and people are still complaining about some of the drug laws and the various changes we made in laws, where we started locking people up for long stretches 30 years ago. It's almost comparable, I guess, to the broken windows policing idea that a lot of people may not like it, but it does lessen crime.
Well, sure. Of course it does. I mean, if the more people you put in prison, the fewer people that are going to be out on the streets committing crimes. But you do have to be conscious of a couple things. One, you don't want to sentence somebody to a greater period of time in prison than they deserve for what they've done and for who they are. But you also have to realize that you have a finite resource in not only the prison, but the courts, the police, the prosecution, the defense attorneys. They're all finite resources, and you can't just, put everybody in prison because it would make everybody safe. You do have to strike a balance, but my concern is that the balance is being struck, at least recently, in the wrong way, and we're leaning too far toward releasing people who are questionable and shouldn't be released, and too far toward not putting people in prison who should be put in prison. And so we put them on community watch, which is probation. They're out, which means they're next door to you. They're out in the community. They pull up next to you at the stoplight, and that's all fine if they're appropriate for that. But some people, I think, are not. And I think the overall um, trend in Idaho, as in the nation, is to put more people who should be in prison out rather than the other way around.
Our guest in the studio is Twin Falls County Prosecutor Grant Loebs. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and News Radio 1310.com. It's 40. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. The telephone number is 736-0300. That's 736-0300. And I believe we have a caller joining us. Caller, you're on the air with Grant Loebs. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Lowe's. I got two questions for you. One, is it a mandatory deal? Like, for example, if I have insurance on all my cars, but I can only drive one, and then I get pulled over because I have an app that I can switch it onto my other car, it's still a mandatory suspension of license after I pay my $130 and all that? And the other, if President Obama on his way out decides to pardon Hillary Clinton, that's over and done with, isn't it? Thank you.
I had just a little bit trouble hearing. I'm not sure I had a great connection, but I think he asked whether he's required to have insurance on all his cars or whether he can switch it from one car to another.
Right. Does the policy cover all of them?
Well, that depends on your policy. I mean, that's a question you ask your insurance company, but you are required to have liability insurance on any car that you're driving. So if you have two cars and you don't want to pay insurance for both, and your insurance company allows you to take the insurance off one and put it on the other, and then off the other and put it back on the one when you're driving, that's fine. The police only care and the law only cares that you have insurance on the car you're driving. You don't have to have insurance on the car that's sitting in your garage or sitting in the driveway.
And then the second question was, is it if the president decides to pardon, again, she's not convicted of anything. It could
If
be
he pardons her, is it
right,
over? I
right.
think,
Give her a pardon in
yeah.
advance.
And of course, you can do that. I mean, that's what President Ford did to President Nixon. I mean, President Nixon wasn't convicted of anything. And the pardon was an anticipatory pardon, pardoning him of any crimes he may or may not have committed and making him unprosecutable for all time. And that is potential. I mean, Obama could certainly do that. He could certainly say, I don't know whether she's guilty of anything. I don't know whether she's been charged with anything, but it would be a mess if she was, and so I'm just pardoning her just to make sure. I mean, he could absolutely do that.
I tend to believe that he wouldn't. I mean, I just get a gut feeling that it hasn't really been discussed, or it's not one of those topics anybody's paying a lot of attention to now that she's lost.
I have no idea. I mean, Trump has been asked, and Trump's people have been asked. Now that the election's over, are you going to pardon her? And his answers have been certainly vague and non-committal, which I think is appropriate. I mean, I don't think he has all the facts yet, but uh, I don't have any idea what might be being discussed in Obama's inner circle. It's typical near the end of a presidency for presidents to start receiving and acting on pardon requests. I I kind of doubt that the Clintons would want a pardon because that looks so bad,
Hmm.
and it would be something that President Obama probably wouldn't want on his record because it would look very bad. And on the other hand, I don't think he has any great affection for Hillary Clinton or the Clintons anyway.
Well, that's
So,
been obvious the last week.
yeah, I just don't see why he would want to damage his reputation to save her from something she might not even be in trouble for.
And we wanted to point out too as well, it wouldn't be like the Mark Rich pardon at the end of the Clinton White House, which Rich was not as well known perhaps as say Hillary Clinton is. So you don't necessarily get as much heat for doing
Yeah,
something like
I
that.
don't see any way that would be under the radar.
Yeah, that would be a little difficult, and
Yeah.
history would remember Barack Obama perhaps in a negative light for doing that. We need to take a short break. We've got more with our county prosecutor, Grant Loebs, coming up. It's about 20 after 9. I say about because we're just a few seconds shy. It's 42. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Got a couple of questions for the prosecutor coming up about potential Supreme Court nominees and what we might see. That's on the way. Before we get back to our guest in just a moment, Grant Loebs is in studio with us, and he's taking your telephone calls too if you're inclined at 736-0300. And Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, newsradio1310.com. I do want to mention, in the course of the last couple of months, I've dropped 40 pounds, and I've done it without a lot of difficulty. I'm not hungry, and I feel great too as well. And I did it through the Total Body Transformation System. And you can lose this weight, and it's still a healthy approach. Your doctor's not going to warn you you're losing it too quickly because of what's actually contained in the diet. And I get to eat one really, really good meal, usually of my favorite foods every day. It's a scientifically proven diet. The Total Transformation or Body Transformation System has been awarded 2 U.S. patents for reducing waist circumference. I'll get that out. So you get so skinny after a while you can't speak either. And the other for increasing metabolic rate and weight control. It burns 6 times more fat and you lose 8 times more weight than normal results from diet and exercise alone. It's all natural and scientifically validated. In fact, it's been featured in many prestigious medical journals coming out of some of the largest universities in the country, backed up with an unconditional full money back guarantee. And if you'd like to know more, I told you the other day, a lot of you are familiar with Don Chandler. He used to run the tuxedo shop here in town. Don lost 50 pounds. If you'd like to know more, give him a telephone call. That's 208-731-3560. Once again, call Marketing Executive Don Chandler at the number one more time, 208-731-3560. I was going to ask you while you were here in studio today, and just a quick mention, if you're just joining us, Grant Loebs is our guest this hour. There's been some discussion about Ted Cruz perhaps going on to the Supreme Court or being a nominee. He has had some issues with Donald Trump. He's not necessarily popular with a lot of his fellow senators, although he certainly campaigned for a great many of them. You think that's a possibility?
I would be surprised, but everything Donald Trump does surprises people. But you know, he's given put out a list of 15 or 20 people who he said he would consider for the Supreme Court. And he's also made the statement that this is a definitive list and that nobody will be added to it. And his Supreme Court pick will be from that list. And Ted Cruz is not on that list. Um, it would surprise me if he put Ted Cruz on because Ted Cruz is somebody who he extensively vilified during his campaign and who hit back with all kinds of nasty things to say about Trump. But, you know, again, I mean, I don't know. And of course, like you said, Ted's not exactly popular in the Senate. Um, and you know, I think he's undeniably an intelligent person. I don't know that he's um, very deft at, you know, dealing with people. He seems to make enemies wherever he goes. Um, the funny thing about Trump's list is it includes almost no one from like Ivy League schools. They're all from, you know, schools in the rest of the country, you know, in the South and in the Midwest. And of course, Trump is, I mean, Cruz is a Harvard guy, and he might want to get away from that too, and he's pretty much said that. So it'll be interesting to see, but I do think he'll have more litmus test kind of questions for nominees than we've seen in the past. Certainly, you know, 10, 20 years ago, we wouldn't have seen those. I think that Obama probably had those questions for nominees as well. It wasn't as well publicized as it's certainly going to be with Trump.
Is Cruz an originalist like Scalia was? Are there any comparisons there?
I think he would be. I mean, it's hard to know until he, you know, becomes a judge, but he certainly says that he is. And I think most of the people on, if not all of the people on Trump's list, would be as well.
I think that conservatives are looking for a sequel to Scalia, right? Is that how we could put that?
Oh, I think that's absolutely what they're looking for. Whether they will find that is another matter, but I think they're looking for somebody who's uh, solid, thoughtful, intelligent, and very conservative.
Are you aware of anybody? You mentioned Trump's list, but are you aware of anybody that you know of who'd be along those very same lines as Scalia, who might be a good choice? A name, perhaps, someone you've come across in your own reading?
No, I mean, and I don't read enough Supreme Court or appeals court decisions to have a feeling about a particular judge. I mean, there are certainly some that I would recommend not, but but I think that anybody in advising President-elect Trump knows not to pick them already. But no, I don't know. And as I looked at this list of people, and I printed it off today, I mean, there's really almost nobody on there that is well known. There's certainly nobody who's a household name. Um, these are judges in Supreme Courts in various states or in a couple of federal judges. Um, and, you know, like so many of the people that we see appointed to the Supreme Court, nobody's ever heard of them before outside of a fairly narrow circle within mainly appellate legal work.
You know, Democrats there was a stretch in the '90s where they kept bringing up Mario Cuomo's name, even though he'd never served on a bench. You know, Jeff Sessions has been mentioned for a couple of cabinet positions, but he is a lawyer.
Hmm.
Could someone like that, for instance, step into a role in the Supreme Court? I would think that that could happen. It's unlikely, but it could, right?
Sure, like your question about Ted Cruz, it could. The president can nominate anybody he wants, and you know, then they go through kind of a vetting process where they get the ABA gives them a rating, and then of course they go through hearings, and you know, if you have the votes, you get on.
I mentioned Sessions because I'm sure Roy Moore is not on the list. He's also a fellow Alabamian.
No, I don't think he's on the list.
He would be, even among some Republicans, might be controversial
Yeah.
if he were nominated.
And as a result of the election, I don't think Barack Obama's on the list anymore either.
Right. And we've got more coming up. We're at 9:30. Grant Loebs is our studio guest. We're at 42. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. One more half hour of Top Story. Our guest in the studio, Grant Loebs, is the Twin Falls County Prosecutor. It's 9:34. Bill Colley with you on Top Story as well on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. It's 44. Just bounced up to 44. Telephone number if you'd like to speak to the prosecutor today, 736-0300, 736-0300. You know, I didn't bring this up previously, but it just struck me that this is going to be a busy time of year for your office because the office parties start, and that means you're going to have a lot of people cycling through that court system who got behind the wheel after having too much to drink.
There's so many different busy times of the year for us. Summer's a busy time of the year. The holiday season's a busy time of the year. St. Patrick's Day is a busy time of the year. There is a lot of stress related with the holidays. I mean, just imagine, you're drinking a lot and you're with your family. What can be worse than that? I mean, so yeah,
Very stressful.
everything that can go wrong in a person's head seems to go wrong during the holidays. And of course, people are, there are lots of increase in depression and increase in just feeling bad about yourself too. So, the weather change, the time change, and the holidays all make for, some problems. But, it's we have so much business throughout the year. While it's possible there may be more incidents, the a case takes so long that, to go through the court system that we're still dealing with cases that happen, in the summer. So it just all spreads out, and it's a very steady caseload.
I think there was a month where you had, I guess it was some months ago, you had a spike in DUI arrests, and then things apparently leveled off after that again. At least they're maybe closer to the average now.
I would say they're increased over like last year, and I think over the year before that. But they we don't have a current spike at the moment. Um, we have had, of course, as you've reported on the radio many times, just an incredible rash of fatalities, motor vehicle fatalities in Twin Falls County and in the Magic Valley generally over this last year. And that that doesn't always result in charges that we can file because often people are deceased, but that is continuing to still be a problem. And some of those are related to drinking and driving, and some just driving badly.
We have another caller with us. And caller, you're on the air on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Twin Falls County Prosecutor Grant Loebs. Go ahead.
Good morning, gentlemen. I tuned in late. I don't know, maybe you already addressed this question. What is the story of this Bo Bergdahl guy? For 2 years, I cannot believe they have not prosecuted this guy yet. Do you have any opinion on that? I'll take my answer off the air. Thank you.
Long, drawn-out process in military court.
Right, it's going on right now. I mean, there's evidence being taken, and I don't know how long a military court-martial of this nature takes, but there are a lot of witnesses and a lot of people are saying a lot of things, and the defense attorney was just complaining, I think it was yesterday, that too much evidence was being admitted on what happened to people who were looking for Mr. Bergdahl. There was evidence that admitted by, I think, a major or a colonel that he was on a mission whose sole purpose was to find Bergdahl, and the guy next to him got shot in the head. And there was a big controversy about whether that evidence should be admitted or whether it was relevant or not. So it's ongoing. I have no idea how long that will take.
When I was a student, we did a moot court where we constructed it like a military tribunal, and there's some obvious differences in setup there, but gathering evidence and presenting evidence it turned out to be exactly the same. For instance, I could not bring up as the prosecutor in that moot court what had happened in an individual's past, even though because it bore no relation to what the charge happened to be.
Yeah, I think that part is largely the same. The way the tribunal is set up is substantially different than a civilian court, and of course the punishments are different. But again, I don't practice in that realm, and I'm just watching like the caller is to see how that all turns out. It's a fascinating process and an interesting case.
And just to point out too, it does show you though how in any court, military or sometimes on the civilian side, uh, that this is not something that anybody rushes to. I mean, there's evidence gathering can be a very slow process, and also presenting that evidence too.
Right. Yeah, and that is one of the things that is most frustrating both to people in the system and to people who are observing is how long something takes. I mean, by the time something gets through the court system, you practically have forgotten the details of what you knew happened at the beginning. If you're watching the news and you see a shooting or you see a robbery, and then you wait to see what happens to the guy who is charged, it can take you a long time to get an answer to that. And that's because the system is designed to work slowly and carefully.
More coming up with Twin Falls County Prosecuting Attorney Grant Loebs in just a few minutes, 20 minutes away from 10 o'clock. 43, Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Our guest in the studio, Twin Falls County Prosecutor Grant Loebs, and he's with us for another 15 minutes or so. Bill Colley with you, too, on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. If you'd like to speak to the prosecutor, 736-0300. Just a quick note, our show is made possible by a lot of great people in this community, including the investment counselors at Waddell & Reed. They've been doing this. It'll be 80 years in just a little over a month they've been doing this. One of the oldest firms offering mutual funds, and they offer two, which most firms don't. And they're not going to gamble your money away. They're going to they're looking out for you in the sense that they're going to try to be conservative investors so you don't have to worry you're going to be able to sleep at night when you put your money to work with them at Waddell & Reed. And they'll work with you individually because they know that every client walking through the door is a unique individual with unique goals. They help manage money, and they take that planning personally. We have, as I say, about 15 minutes to go. Before we wrap up, there's been a lot of discussion, especially the last few days, about what's going to happen with perhaps anywhere from 11 million to 20 million or 30 million people who are here in this country illegally. I wanted to share something with you. This, I guess, was on the Kelly file last night. It's about these so-called sanctuary cities where you've got California already talking about secession, oddly enough, and you've got sanctuary cities. This is Andrew Napolitano, the former judge from New Jersey, speaking about sanctuary cities and some of the difficulties people might have with this. And I wonder if you could listen to this for a minute and then react.
Even though this will be frustrating to a President Trump, and he probably will have to find some way to sanction them financially.
That's what he's
Congress.
saying. He's promising to cancel all federal funding to them.
He can't do that unilaterally, but I'm sure with Republicans controlling both houses of the Congress, he could put into expenditures or block grants to cities. You must do the following things in order to qualify for the block grants. But it's a basic principle of constitutional law that the federal government cannot force the states or the towns and cities to work for it. So Mayor Emanuel, Mayor de Blasio, Mayor Garcetti are within their legal rights to do what they're doing.
But what's happened, sanctuary cities get carried out in a number of different ways. Like, for example, in Chicago, they originally just stopped all city agencies from inquiring about immigration status when they provide services. So it's like, don't ask, don't tell. We don't want to know.
Well,
and in other cities, they just refuse to cooperate when ICE issues a detainer on an individual. It's like, didn't happen, didn't see it.
That stuff can have unintended consequences that the locals are not going to want. The type of people that Donald Trump is talking about are not your average ma and pa. He's talking about someone who has been convicted.
Like Francisco Hernandez.
Correct. Convicted of a crime, gets out of jail and is now free, but is illegally present. Allowing that person to stay in Chicago is going to harm the citizens of Chicago.
Now, my follow-up to this is, the question for the prosecutor, or the reaction for the prosecutor, is USA Today had a columnist yesterday say, yes, the president will have wide leeway in setting immigration policy. That's true. But it also sounds as if local governments have wide leeway in effectively nullifying whatever that would be. Is that a good assessment?
Well, to the extent that they're not obligated to have, I mean, Twin Falls is not obligated to have the Twin Falls County Sheriff or the Twin Falls Police Department go out and enforce federal immigration law. We cannot stop ICE people or federal agents from enforcing federal immigration law. Well, I mean, you can't throw a cordon around the city and tell the feds they can't come in and enforce the law. But what Napolitano is talking about there is that you can't require the local law enforcement officials to do federal law enforcement work. It's usually true that agencies at all levels of government cooperate with one another. In these sanctuary cities, the decision has made to refuse to cooperate, and you can't force them to cooperate in that specific way. But of course, the president has and the federal Congress has all kinds of authority. Napolitano said you can't. The federal government can't force local agencies to do anything. Well, they do that all the time. I mean, you have to reduce your speed limit to 55, or you lose all federal money. I mean, there are so many things that the federal government does to force states and cities to do things that the federal government wants. And I think a lot of that can be done through executive action alone, through executive orders and so forth. But the narrower question, can the federal government order the local sheriff to do something? No, he can't. He certainly can't order him to uh, enforce federal law. But almost everywhere, except these places that are doing this for obviously political reasons, almost everywhere there is good cooperation between federal agents and local agents in doing this. And of course, the federal agents don't go after every one of these 11 to 20 million people who just happen to be here illegally, who entered the country without the appropriate paperwork. But both federal and local agencies should be going after the people who entered the country illegally and then commit crimes within the country. And in Twin Falls, we get good cooperation from the federal government on that, and we give cooperation to the federal government on that. If we find somebody here who is a criminal, meaning they've committed a crime like burglary or robbery or rape or something, and they're illegal, we don't have any problem, cooperating with the federal government to make sure that whatever is done, whatever needs to be done to protect local people is done.
We have a caller looking to join us. And caller, it's coming up on 10 minutes away from 10 o'clock. It's 45, and you're on the air with Grant Loebs on KLIX.
Yes, I was just wondering, how about the other opposite, where Arizona was enforcing federal law, and the feds went after Arizona and tried even to put Joe Arpaio in jail.
Well, and that's another point too. I mean, you don't have local police and local sheriffs out enforcing specifically and strictly federal law, but a lot of times when you're enforcing local law, you just coincidentally enforce federal law, because if there is a person who's entered the country illegally and who happens to be arrested for a DUI or happens to be arrested for something else, then you notify the federal government and they do what they do to start the process of deportation. But you also have, and I think what Arpaio was doing, the details of that I don't have, but I think what he was doing was specific um, programs to actually catch illegal aliens and to um, catch them and hold them and then turn them over for deportation. And exactly what he was doing that the feds, told him he couldn't do, I don't know. But that is something that, most local agencies don't have the manpower to do anyway. Um, you know, uh, the generally what happens, the way we find somebody in the local system that has entered the country illegally is through another crime. We stop them for a DUI or for no tags on their car or something, and we say, show us your driver's license, and they have nothing, and it turns out they're not here legally.
This gets back to some of those issues with broken windows policing, because a lot of courts and judges say you just can't stop anybody on the street without probable cause and say, where are you from? What are you doing? And look through their identification. This is when I saw the movie The Great Escape when I was a kid, it was chilling to see guys get off a train and the Gestapo would be there saying papers. And so we can't stop and demand people produce papers just because they're walking down a street.
Yeah, generally they have to be doing something wrong that brings their attention to the policeman. But of course, a policeman can ask you for your papers, and you can say, "I'm not going to give you my papers. I've not done anything wrong," and then he's done. I mean, a policeman can ask you for your ID, and you can volunteer it. The question is, at what point can he force you to give his ID, give your ID, and he has to have some reason to believe that you're doing something wrong. And driving. You have to produce a driver's license if a policeman asks you to, because you have to have that to drive. But he has to articulate, if he wants to make a case out of that, he has to articulate you were doing something wrong.
Well, that's the same argument I've heard. A police officer, if you get pulled over, can ask you where you're going
Hmm.
or where you're coming from. You don't have to answer that question, but yes, you do have to produce that driver's license.
Right, because you're driving, and in order to be driving, you have to have that paperwork. But if a policeman just stops you because you're driving down the street and you're not doing anything wrong, and he asks you for your driver's license, you have to give the driver's license, but he's not going to be able to make a case out of that because he had no legitimate reason to stop you. But normally, if you're stopped, it's because you were speeding or you ran a stop sign or you made an illegal turn or something like that. And in all those cases, you have to produce the ID, and you might get a citation. And if it turns out that there's a warrant out for you for robbing a bank in Minnesota, or if you're in the country illegally and they can determine that at that point, then you're subject to being held for those other offenses.
I used to work in a county back east where the county seat was a relatively small community compared to some of the other larger communities. So they still had a very small police department. I mean, the physical plant itself was small. And the chief of police was criticized because apparently he wasn't turning over people who were illegal aliens. And he explained it to me this way. He said, I'd like to do this. He said, I believe we should be doing it. But he said, by the time I wait for someone to come and pick these people up, I have a tiny little holding cell and I need it for other reasons. And he said, my taxpayers aren't going to build me a bigger jail. So his business wasn't being a jailer.
Mhm.
And so he was just turning people loose, and he was criticized for that. But I did understand his point. He didn't have the resources to play the role that the federal government can play in all of this.
Right, and that goes back to my comment about the sheriff in Arizona. I mean, to the extent that he was doing that, he has facilities that are much greater and more able to withstand an increase in inmates than we do here in Twin Falls. I mean, if the Twin Falls sheriff just decided he was going to go full out looking for every person who's in this country illegally, the jail would be full immediately, and then we would wait and wait for the federal government to pick people up, and it would be a problem. But that's not what's going on, of course, in the sanctuary cities. In the sanctuary cities, they are coming across these people, they're charging them with local crimes. They're convicting them in some cases. They're either putting them in jail or prison or probation and not telling the federal government anything about it. And so the question is whether not whether you should go out and knock on every door and find people who are here illegally, but whether when they come into your system through other means, you should hide them, and that's what's going on in the sanctuary cities.
And we should point out, I think Arpaio was mentioned for Director of Homeland Security, but I think because of his age, that's unlikely to happen at this point.
I think he was mentioned just to shake people up.
Yes.
I can't imagine him going through Senate confirmation.
But he would be headed back to his hometown, which a lot of people aren't aware of this, but he was a Washington policeman for decades before he moved to Arizona and got into politics there.
My guess is that would be a long and very ugly hearing to approve him for
would
anything.
Be very entertaining. And you referenced just the fact that Tom Carter, if he were to put his deputies out there and say, track down the illegal immigrants, they wouldn't be able to handle any other cases. And so then the public would say, how come you're not making arrests for these other situations?
Right. And local agencies, and really the federal government is not equipped to deal with the number that we have anyway. Local agencies don't have the manpower for that. But we do have the manpower to apprehend people who are violating the law and breaking other laws. And if they happen to also be here illegally, then we put in a call. The sheriff's department puts in a call to the ICE people, and they either come and get them or they don't. But they're here on other charges usually when that happens.
We want to thank you for coming by today, and we'll see you again, I believe, the third Tuesday in December. And
I think that's right. Yep.
somewhere in that range. And we need to move a day around here or there, we can do that too as well. But good having the prosecutor in studio with us. If people have any questions for your office, again, they can always call, right?
That's right. We're there all day, every day during the week. And if you have questions or if you have something you've seen that you need to report, just call the office.
We want to mention coming up following the program today, Rush Limbaugh. And God willing, and the Creek Don't Rise, I'll be back here tomorrow morning. Some of our guests tomorrow include, we'll have someone coming in. We're not sure who in the rotation from Dr. Jonathan Tripp's office for Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. And we're also scheduled to chat with Congressman Raul Labrador. All of that tomorrow.